4:19 a.m. on a winter Tuesday in mid-October. I woke to a municipal confirmation email telling me our water service had been scheduled to transfer to a one-bedroom on East Willow at the end of the month. The request listed both our names and a phone number I didn't recognize. In the dull blue of my phone's night mode, I could see the new service address, Suite 3B, 1144 East Willow, somewhere across town in a part of Ravensley I never had the reason to visit. My wife was on a night shift, the first of 3 at Northgate Medical, and the house was as quiet as a library stack's room after close. I lay there with the phone hovering above my face, tasting the metallic dryness of sleep and fear. We own our little craftsman on Hawthorne and 32 bedrooms, creaky floors, a lavender bush that refuses to die no matter what winters do to it. We bought that house together, one bad roof and one strict budget at a time. I stared at the water department header again, pinched to zoom, read the wording about service transfer requests requiring identification. It had a case number embedded in the footer and a warning that fraudulent requests could be referred to the city attorney. I scrolled until the motion made my eyes burn. Then I stopped and listened to the refrigerator hum and the world change shape behind it. The next morning was the kind where the sidewalk shines even though it hasn't rained. The wind had scarred everything. I set out cereal for our daughter, who ate slowly with the remote tucked under her elbow the way kids hide contraband candy. The hallway smelled faintly like the mint soap she likes, and underneath it a trace of bleach from the bathroom I had cleaned at midnight when I couldn't keep my hands still. I packed her lunch and checked the water email again just to assure myself it was still there and not a weird dream. It was there. Service start date, October 31. We live in Ravensley, Colorado, about 40 minutes north of Denver, not famous for anything except a half-closed textile mill and a river walk the city keeps trying to make trendy. I manage technology and programming at the public library branch near the mill ruins, digital card renewals, store time calendars, broken Chromebooks brought in by the school kids who swear they didn't spill anything sticky on them, and event bookings that always come with someone asking if they can move 30 chairs just 15 feet to the left. My job puts me in the middle of town life in small, unglamorous ways. I know who prints elaborate recipes and never actually cooks them. I know who comes in every Thursday to read their obituaries. I know which dads download piano sheet music they never practice. I also know how much people can hide in such ordinary routines because I have been hiding in mine. For years, our schedules move like trains crossing a junction but never colliding. My wife works nights as a respiratory therapist, 3/12s with occasional doubles when the unit is understaffed. She leaves for the hospital around 6:30 p.m. after a ritualistic nap in the late afternoon that our daughter has learned not to disturb. I pick up from aftercare, eat something that doesn't stain, and make sure the backpack is set by the door. Strangely, it used to feel like romance anyway, the exchange of sticky notes on the fridge, late-night texts if she had a patient on a ventilator who scared her. We built a life in those missed moments like people build forts out of blankets and chairs, fragile, improvised, meaningful because we chose it. We are not rich. The medical bills for my dad's heart episodes last spring set us back, in a way long-term more than immediate. The roof replacement after the hailstone took whatever cushion we had managed to grow. We carry a promotion card with a 0% window I respect as if it were a moral code. Our mortgage is not terrible, but it is a mortgage. She has student loans that we pretend are planets orbiting in the distance. The library gave me a cost of living increase that equaled my coffee budget. We are careful. Careful becomes a personality after a while. If I had to pin the first red flag, it wasn't perfume or late nights or the cliché lipstick on a collar. It was laundry detergent. Our house has smelled like the same cheap, lemony detergent since we moved in because I buy it in bulk. And then, about 3 weeks before the water email, my wife said he started coming home with a different smell. It was softer, like a baby store or a boutique laundromat. She claimed the hospital switched to a new brand in the staff showers, and I felt petty for noticing, except it didn't go away. Then there was her phone's location services being off whenever she forgot her charger, and the scrubs in an overnight bag packed far tighter than they needed to be, and the way she started keeping her landlord with her ID in a zip pocket when she used to leave it draped on the hall tree. I chalked it up to burnout. Every night I read headlines about hospitals being overwhelmed, about therapists asked to float between units. I told myself she was exhausted, and I should not demand stories from her exhaustion. Then the car log started to bother me. Our Toyota has a stupidly helpful infotainment system that records recently paired devices and frequently visited locations. When I got the oil changed, I scrolled through out of boredom and found 2 phones listed. One was hers. The other was a K. No last name. Just K's iPhone, paired 2 days in a row at around 7:20 a.m., which would be when she drives home. I told myself that maybe a coworker needed a ride. I told myself so many versions of maybe that I started to hate that word. One night, while folding towels, I saw a small tag in the bottom of her tote bag with a barcode and the words Willow Bin Self-Storage Unit 314. It looked like a keycard sleeve or a claim check. I held it like it might bite me and then put it back where it had been. I timed my next breath and failed, took a second, slower one, and hated that too. The storage place was on East Willow, near the same street as the water service email. I looked up the address on my phone and recognized the strip of warehouses that hide behind the old field lot. The storage facility had a bland logo and a very clean website with a customer portal. I tried to guess the password. I failed. I stopped because this was the kind of line that you cross only once, and I wanted to be a person who could still say he hadn't crossed it. I decided to ask her about the water email. When she got home around 8 the next morning, she dropped her keys in the bowl with a scatter of coins. The house should have smelled like stale air and coffee. It smelled like that other detergent. I told her about the email and she blinked too long before she spoke. She said it must have been a mistake, that the hospital had to fill out the change of address form for payroll updates and the city must be connected to some database, that she would fix it after sleeping. She said the words calmly and rubbed her eyes like sin irritated her. She stepped past me into the bedroom and I felt the conversation die because it had no place to happen anymore. I told myself maybe she was right. Maybe some bureaucratic crossfire had hit us, because that happens in the world is often stupid. At lunch, I sat in the library staff office with my Tupperware, opened the city website, and called the number in the email. A woman said she could see the service request and that it had been made online with identity verification through a utility portal account. She confirmed the phone number on the request did not match the one on our home account. She told me I could file a dispute and gave me a reference number and a PDF link I later downloaded and printed because paper felt like something I could wrestle with, unlike a screen. I wrote down the case number like a man writes down a miracle cure. It made me feel as if I had done something instead of sitting in a chair counting how many times my heart beat between bites. That afternoon, I checked our joint credit card account. There was a series of small, balance-looking charges that had not registered in any meaningful way. $10 here, 12 there, but to places I never saw her go. A cashless laundromat on East Willow. A parking garage at the corner of Pine and Jesmond, not near the hospital. A small card-present charge at a coffee kiosk outside a coworking building where a lot of freelancers rent pod-sized offices. Then 2 statements down, tucked between grocery runs and gas, a recurrent monthly charge outside the WB self-storage Ravensley. It was $59 a month and had run for 5 months. I called the storage company pretending to be a prospective customer and asked basic questions about security and access. The kid who answered sounded bored until I complimented the website. He said the facility used a keypad with a tenant code and that they could put an additional name on file for access if we wanted to share. He mentioned they offered free locks if you paid for 3 months up front. I ended the call politely. Then I sat in the library's little break area and watched a dad on the other side of the glass tie his son's shoe and felt the sterile, dumb rage that comes when life keeps performing like a commercial while yours breaks in an unmarketable way. I started writing things down. I wrote down the storage charge and the laundromat and the coffee kiosk. I wrote down the whey detergent, the keycard sleeve, the paired phone. I kept notes in a paper notebook because I didn't want a digital footprint in case I still turned out to be paranoid and we salvaged this. My job trains me well in paper trails. I put dates in the left margin and little boxes I could fill in when I had verified things. There is nothing more humiliating than treating your marriage like a reference desk request and still feeling grateful to your own organizational skills. On Friday, we had a fundraiser planning meeting for our daughter's school. Not the PTA, how school calls it the enrichment committee, because Ravensley tries to be fancy about small things. We met in the gym bleachers to plan a book fair and a chilly cook-off on what to do about the broken scoreboard that a previous custodian wired with what someone charitably called initiative. There were about a dozen of us parents, plus the principal who kept pulling his sleeves down over his hands, a nervous habit he never admitted. I had printed flyers for the book fair with a QR code I was proud of because it actually worked in dim light, and I laid them out on the aluminum seat in front of me. My wife had texted to say she would try to swing by before napping if the unit let her out on time. She did not arrive. In the middle of a debate about whether chili should be judged blind or if people could actively campaign with samples, the gym doors opened and in walked a woman I had seen once in the parking lot hugging my wife after a run, the way co-workers hug when they had held something heavy together. She was in scrubs, hair up, eyes bright in the way some people carry adrenaline like a cloak. She sat 2 rows down. She did not see me until the principal asked me about the QR code, and I spoke. She turned, and her gaze did a small, unmistakable flinch, the kind of movement only the guilty or the suddenly cold make. Later, her name would be a detail we argued about as if it changed anything. At that moment, she was just the equation balancing itself in a line I had been miscomputing. I didn't make a scene. I did something worse. At the end of the meeting, while people were gathering extension cords and talking about crockpots, I stood up and said I needed to address something uncomfortable because it mattered to school volunteers that people be dependable with funds. I held up my phone and told the group that our family had discovered unauthorized charges tied to a storage unit and a second address. I said I was bringing it up because it might affect how payments were handled in the coming weeks, and I wanted full transparency in case I had to step back from handling the square reader at the chili tables. Then I read the last 4 digits of the card associated with the storage unit and said I would be freezing it. I watched faces do the complicated math people do when they are being asked to witness something they didn't consent to. She froze. She did not speak, because I did not give her space to. I was embarrassed at my own calm. The principal nodded like the man at the funeral who reads psalms for families who do not have pastors. I went home and called the bank to freeze the card. The representative's voice lowered half a tone when I mentioned potential fraud. He gave me a bank case number and told me a mailer would arrive with forms within 7 business days. I opened a separate checking account at the credit union on my lunch break and ordered a debit card mailed to my work. I took 30 minutes off the timesheet even though the director told me not to, because I did not want favours. I emailed the city water office the dispute form and asked for written acknowledgement. They sent it with an intake stamp that made me feel like paper could save me. I typed a 1-page letter that said I would not be responsible for any debts or obligations tied to properties not on Hawthorne and 3rd, and I printed it and slid it into a file that I labelled because I could not resist the organisation boundaries. That weekend, our daughter stayed overnight with my sister in Lake Passon, a town that smells like wood smoke and damp leaves in October and feels like a poem you forget the ending to. My wife said she was working an extra shift and asked if we could move Halloween costumes shopping because she would be too tired, and I said yes because it was easier than hearing lies. The house was so quiet that the ticking of the kitchen clock cut into my head. Around dusk, I drove to East Willow. I told myself I was going to understand something I could not understand from home. The storage facility was cleaner than I expected. All corrugated metal and fresh blacktop with keypad stands that blinked green at regular pulses. I waited until a truck pulled in until just closed enough to get the gate before it slid shut. I circled slowly until I saw Building 3. I parked with the engine off and the windows cracked. I could hear a dog barking somewhere, the kind of anxious bark small dogs used to talk up their body weight. I watched the corners of the building like they might tell me anything. It felt ridiculous to sit in a car and hope metal doors could provide answers. Then a compact hatchback with a hospital parking sticker turned the corner and gave me the worst kind of answer, confirmation. The car pulled to a stop by 314. She got out and keyed in with practice, brisk and tired, with a tote bag on her shoulder and, in her free hand, a carton of something that looked like it came from a small kitchen. It was the way she slid the metal latch, quick and confident, that did the most damage. People do not move that way in spaces they have borrowed. They move that way at home. A man stepped into the frame of the open unit door. He wasn't tall. He carried a duffel that had been patched at the seam with duct tape, a correction done by someone who would rather fix than replace. He and my wife stood too close to be polite. He pointed into the unit and she nodded. She pressed her palm flat against his forearm in a gesture so casual and intimate it made me feel like an intruder in my own skin. She handed him the curtain and he smiled down. The angle of his head made me think of people who coax feral cats to eat. There was no kissing. There was no scandalous movement. There was only the wordless grammar of two people who didn't need words. I drove home and sat in our driveway in the dark, listening to the whispery rattle of the cottonwood on the next block and the distant whoop of someone's car alarm getting a false positive from the wind. When I went inside, I took the notebook out again. I wrote the time and what I had seen. I did not write adjectives because I did not trust them. The page already looked like a report, and I hated that too. On Monday, a certified letter arrived addressed to my wife from a property management company. I signed for it because not signing never stops the mail from knowing where you live. I put it on the table and texted her a picture of the envelope. That evening, she claimed it was about a friend's rental reference she had agreed to receive on their behalf. I said I would leave it unopened for her. Then, while she was in the shower, the envelope slid into my hand with no resistance. I slit it open neatly, like a librarian mends a dust jacket, and read about a lease addendum for 1144 East Willow, Suite 3B. The addendum accepted a second occupant as of September 1, with both names listed, my wife and a man I had never heard of. The paper had a faint smell, like turner warmed too long on a machine with a cracked roller. I put the letter back in its envelope and sealed it with a piece of tape I didn't own until I owned it. I called a family lawyer the next morning. Not to file anything yet, I told myself. Just to understand the borders. He had a voice that said he had spent years talking with people who were not yet ready to hear their own sentences. He told me what filing a legal separation might cost and what it would require. He asked if there were children and I said yes, and he waited through my silence afterward. He said we could establish temporary orders and in Colorado, fault would not be relevant to asset division but could be to parental decision making if you could demonstrate a pattern that impacted the child's stability. He gave me a consultation case number and told me to call the front desk for times. I hung up and walked to the back of the library where we keep tax forms and watched sunlight through the high windows make rainbows on the terrazzo floor. Colours shifted when people walked by. People always shift your colours. She brought me cookies that evening in a blue tin that used to hold sewing notions when we were first married and then held nothing but stale dreams and a broken tape measure. She said the unit had a bake sale fundraiser because a co-worker of mine was sick. She believed I would love sea salt chocolate because I always picked those from the variety pack. I put the tin on the counter and said thank you. I did not say the cookies felt like hush money in the shape of things I love. When she went to shower, I opened the lid and found not just cookies but a small receipt folded carefully under the parchment. The receipt belonged to a boutique grocer near the co-working space, with the timestamp of 11:42 a.m. to an line item for diaper cream and baby wipes along with the chocolate and flour and eggs and sea salt. My hands shook in that small, infuriating way like the body is a skiff and you never learned to stand in one. I did not jump to paternity stories or anything that dramatic. I remembered that the man at the storage unit had handled the carton like something living. Maybe there was a baby. Maybe it was his and hers, or his and someone else's, or a family member's, or none of the above. My mind wrote small plays and shredded them before intermission. I could not seem to choose a script, so my body chose storage and investigation instead. I called Northgate Medical's HR and asked them to send me a verification of her shits for the past month because the daycare needed it for a scholarship application. HR loves paperwork, even false pretexts that resemble their proper cousins. They sent a PDF with dates and batch swipe-ins. The hospital uses the kind of system that logs the exact door and time. I cross-referenced the hospital badge reports against the parking garage charges and the coffee kiosk and the laundromat. Patterns emerged like stains in a photograph bathed too long. Twice, she swiped out far earlier than the end of a scheduled shift, with no overtime logged. Once, she swiped in at noon on a day she claimed a double. The swipe suggested she had not been in the building at all between 1:15 and 6:0. The nights she claimed were crazy, often had clean gaps. The independent witness came uninvited. Our neighbour, Mrs. Carville, walks every morning at absurd times with a headlamp like she is spelunking in suburban darkness. She knocked on my door at 5:50 am, holding a reusable shopping bag like a trophy. She told me she had found my wife's ID lanyard near the community mailbox at the corner and thought I might want it. She said she had seen my wife walk with a man toward East Willow a few times, very early, carrying a small plastic bin like you carry supplies for a new baby or pet home for the first time. She said she hoped everything was alright. She said it in that tone people use when they are offering both sympathy and a handhold, if you want it. I thanked her and took the lanyard and closed the door and leaned against it with my eyes shut, feeling the soft press of the plastic against my palm. I printed the hospital swipe records, the bank charges, the water dispute form, the storage logo, the lease addendum, and the email confirmations. I slid them into a manila folder the colour of old school buses and labelled it October. I stopped sleeping in real hours and began sleeping like a person who fears their own dreams. I made pumpkin pancakes for our daughter and watched her cut them into perfect squares even though there was no instruction to. I waited for Halloween like a sentence waiting for a verb. The public scene I did not plan arrived at the library, because of course it did. We were hosting a small-town author who wrote earnest memoir essays about raising chickens and children, and the event had drawn half the town, including the principal and 3 enrichment committee parents and a smattering of hospital staff because the author had once taught a journaling workshop on campus. We lined up folding chairs and the smell of field coats and clean hair was thick in the auditorium. People waved at each other over rows like congregants at a church service. My wife walked in with a woman from the gym. They chose seats in the 3rd row as if they had done so before, as if they had a pattern of picking places where they could see and slip out. The author spoke with that warm, overshared cadence of someone who knows his audience forgives him anything. He read a passage about deciding which rooster to keep, and the crowd made small appreciative noises at the right lines. When he opened it to questions, a man asked about balancing work and family, and the author offered a sturdy answer about communication and calendars. I felt something in me tilt at the word calendars, and I realized I would never perfect this. I would only pretend better or worse, and that handling my life could be as simple as telling Arun the truth. I stood up. I did not address the author. I addressed the crowd with a calm that felt borrowed, like a suit that fits well enough for one event before you return it. I said I manage events at the library and occasionally I need to make housekeeping announcements, and then I said I needed to make one now that was less housekeeping and more accountability. I held up a folder and explained the due to fraudulent changes to our household utilities and undisclosed financial accounts tied to my family by name. I would be freezing our joint cards and withdrawing as a signatory on the Friends of the Library account until matters resolved. I said the utility department had assigned a case number and I recited it from memory because repetition lodges the like hooks. I said I had contacted a lawyer and would be providing the school with a letter clarifying who holds authority for field trip permissions and medical emergencies. The room went silent except for the HVAC, which lay across my voice like a slow river. People turned to look at my wife and the woman next to her because people do the math. The principal became a statue with a tie. My director put a hand on the back of my chair in the aisle as if to anchor me to my own body. I did not ask for anyone's judgment. I did not ask for anything except the right to restructure the flow of money that had been used to build the space I had not known existed. When I finished, I sat down. The author did what professionals do and pivoted, offering the crowd a polite distraction in the form of a story about miscounting eggs. The woman in the third row had both hands clenched so tightly around her tote straps that the veins stood out like leaf ribs. My wife stared at nothing with a focus that could cut glass. The next wave of reveals landed like a string of firecrackers that popped slow enough to count but fast enough to burn you. 2 days later, a letter arrived from our mortgage company about a home equity line of credit inquiry that had been pulled and then cancelled after failing verification. The letter listed the credit pull date and a phone number for a loan officer with a name that sounded like someone who could tell a very gentle no. The letter also listed our property address and a note to contact them if we had not initiated the request. I called. The loan officer said someone had tried to initiate a HELOC online with our property and had scanned copies of driver's licenses, but the system flagged the IP address as unusual for our account and bounced it to manual review. He said the application had used my wife's maiden name. He said if I wished to proceed with the fraud report, there would be a formal case number he could assign. He assigned it. He read it to me slowly so I could write it in my October folder, and I wrote it in block letters that looked like a teenager trying to be neat at the test desk. Next, a text from our auto insurance app pinged with a notice that a new driver had been added to our policy and then removed within the same hour. Our agent later told me the request had been made through the customer portal from a device not previously associated with our account. The name added was the same as the man on the lease addendum, and although the agent was careful with words, she implied that someone had been trying to secure legal status to drive one of our vehicles temporarily, perhaps to pick up our daughter, perhaps for reasons I could not imagine yet. I removed the secondary portal user access we had set up years ago when we were younger and more trusting. I changed the password to something I would never be able to say aloud without spitting. Then there was the pediatrician's office calling to confirm an appointment my wife had rescheduled for our daughter, except she had scheduled it for a location across town near East Willow, a satellite we never used. The nurse wondered if that was convenient or a mistake. I asked her who had provided the alternate contact number because the nurse said she had one listed, and she read a number that matched the one from the water service transfer. I took the nurse's name and wrote it down as if I were a detective in a show played by an actor who gets paid to look more decisive than I felt. An email from my wife's hospital followed with an EOB-like document clarifying benefits for dependents under a plan due to a mid-year qualifying life event. The event had triggered when a dependent had been added or removed. It did not specify which for privacy, and asked for documentation by the end of the month. I stared at the bland administrative font and thought about birth and death as bureaucratic signals on a chart. I looked at our daughter cutting construction paper into shapes of lungs for a school human body project and wondered where a child fits into a story that keeps refusing to be about a child. The answer was everywhere and nowhere at once, like air. I did not scream. I organized. I wrote a certified letter that said any removal or addition of dependents under my wife's plan that affected our daughter required my written consent, and I delivered it with a cover page that used the words contingency and co-parent and notarized because a notary sounds like a judge hums. I prepared a second envelope for the school stating that until further notice, only I and my sister were authorized to pick up, with the principal initialing the copy for our record. I requested an audit of the key fob entries from our working space because I occasionally used the rooms for a parent tech class, and in return they sent me a CSV where one entry stood out. A day pass under my wife's name had been used during hours she told me she was at Northgate. I saw the list of times and pictured her moving through glass doors with an economy I had never noticed. At Thanksgiving planning, the enrichment committee met again, this time not in the gym but in the cafeteria, where the linoleum supports the weight of both food and heartbreak. I brought the square reader and passed it to a mom who runs a small custom cake business on Main Street. I told her I would not be handling funds for a while, and she nodded in a way that said she had handed heavy things to others before. The principal thanked me for my early transparency and then said something about a community being only as strong as its willingness to hold one another accountable, which was not a bad line considering he probably practiced it in his calm era. The author event had become a town story. You do something like that and it belongs to other people now, and you have to accept that. The final round of twists arrived in a stack like overdue bills, and in a way, that is what they were. A letter from a university research lab on pediatric respiratory outcomes asked for consent to share identified data. My wife had enrolled our daughter after a health scare last winter, and the follow-up was routine, except the lab listed a contact address at East Willow. A security firm contracted by our HOA sent notice of someone loitering near the community mailbox at off hours. They attached grainy stills from a camera-mounted battery on a light pole. In one frame, the man from the storage unit held my wife's lanyard like a talisman. The timestamp aligned with the morning Mrs. Carville found it. The image felt cruel in its vagueness, like a caricature drawn by a bored artist on a boardwalk. And then, the detail that cut cleanest because it was quiet, the Toyota's maintenance reminder paint. I took it in on a day off, and the mechanic told me the odometer had risen more than it should have for the month given our usual commute. He pointed to the mileage next to the service sticker I had affixed in September. He asked me if we had taken a trip. I said no, and he shrugged because it is not the mechanic's job to know where you go, only when your brakes will give up. I confronted my wife without making it a scene anywhere except home. This is the part of the confession where I could write angry words and make her a villain with a cartoon shadow, but the truth is thinner and sharper than any script I could improve on. She denied the apartment at first, then said it belonged to someone she was helping, then called me controlling for going through records that were technically in both our names. She said the man was a co-worker dealing with a custody case and that she had been storing items for him while he stabilized. She said the diaper cream was for a patient's family who had no transportation. She said the HELOC attempt was a misunderstanding of an online pre-qualification button. She told me I had embarrassed her at the library and in front of people who know us. She told me stress made her do things out of character. She used my own careful, boundary-loving vocabulary until I wanted to break it and throw the pieces like gravel at her window. I told her I needed facts I could verify. I said I wanted the storage unit code and a time she would go with me to open it, and I wanted to see what was inside, not because possession is 9/10 of who's right, but because space tells the truth no one will. I handed her a printed schedule of openings the unit offered posted online, circled in 2 colors, because I am a librarian and that is how I fight. I told her I would not move forward with legal paperwork if she would come with me and open the unit within 72 hours and allow me to photograph the contents and inventory them. I said if she refused, I would file, and the October folder would go with me to the lawyer, accompanied by an affidavit from the principal that I had not touched school funds since the day of the announcement and that I had preemptively got it against any conflict. I said I had frozen our joint cards and opened my own account and that a letter to the school, the pediatrician, and the insurer had been sent and received with signed acknowledgements, copies attached, because to remove me from decision-making regarding our daughter would now require a judge or an act of God, and I trusted neither. She agreed to go to the unit because the alternative was a legal reality she could not perform her way out of. The appointment was a Saturday at noon. The day had that brittle autumn light that makes shadows look like cutouts you could peel up with a razor blade. We drove without the radio. We punched in the code and the gate opened with a slow grace that felt sarcastic. She walked ahead, tote bag on her shoulder like always. The man was not there. The door slid up with the same quick confidence I had watched from the car weeks earlier. Inside sat the story she had not told, and because life loves a twist at the worst possible moment, the story I had not found a way to imagine correctly either. There were plastic bins, yes, and a pack and play folded against the wall. There were 2 camp chairs and a stack of blankets, the kind you buy cheap for tailgates and moving as needed. There was a small set of drawers like the ones you store socks in if you don't own a dresser. There were 3 boxes labelled a kitchen in fat marker and an IKEA lamp still boxed. A drawing tacked with a strip of paint is taped to the corrugated metal, a crayon house with a sun and 3 stick figures, 2 tall, once more. The sunlit lines radiating like a child thought the world deserved as much. A duffel with a stitched name tag that matched the man on the lease addendum. On top of the drawers, a folder. Paper inside. I asked if I could look, and I did without waiting. The papers were custody filings and visitation schedules and receipts for supervised visits at the centre across town, a printout of a communications log with a state caseworker, and a letter from a mediator that used words like de escalate and child-focused. The dates ran back to July. There was a copy of a restraining order against the man's ex, filed after she took their toddler across state lines. There were notes in my wife's handwriting about exchanges and how to help a child transition between homes. There was a calendar with entries that said things like park date and library craft time. There was a receipt for a toaster. It was, in some part, exactly what she had said, and in a larger, more dangerous part, what she had refused to say, a life assembled near ours, using our names to move boxes, a home halfway set up with money and attention skimmed from the edge of ours. She told me she had been helping him, and that it became helping him more, and that he was good with kids, and that he laughed at things in a way she had not had in years. She told me this without looking at me, which is another way of lying even if the words are true. I understood what she wanted me to understand. I also understood what she did not say, that she had been living inside that second life on one, and she was supposed to be exhausted at the hospital, that she had used our accounts because she felt entitled to her own happiness subsidized by the safety she had built with me. She wore guilt like a suit that did not fit and blamed me for the tailoring. I stood in the metal hallway and felt how memories and places built to store other people's lives. I thought of our daughter's homework folder and the pumpkin we still hadn't carved on the lavender bush outside our bedroom that had hung under hail and fruits, and our neglect simply by deciding stubbornness was a virtue. I did not yell. Sometimes the absence of yelling is not grace but grief. We left the unit. She told me she would spend the weekend at her sister's to give me space, and I let the lie walk in front of me like a dog that doesn't realize it has slipped the leash. I went home and made a sandwich and ate it standing up. I emailed the lawyer and attached scans from the October folder and asked for his soonest appointment. I emailed our daughter's teacher and asked if I could volunteer for the reading circle on Wednesdays because the act of reading out loud to children is a way to remind our voice what it was made to do. I sat on the porch and watched Mrs. Carver loop the block twice with a headlamp even though the sun was still up. You are who you are in small, repeatable ways. The leaves scraped across the sidewalk like the world writing a secret language no one decodes until it's too late. What followed did not fit into a tidy lesson. The lawyer filed a petition for allocation of parental responsibilities, not because I intended to keep my wife from my daughter, but because I wanted a schedule that respected work and school and did not depend on anyone's good intentions. We arranged a temporary plan that made me feel both fair and foolish. My wife moved an overnight bag to her sister's for real and began sending me screenshots of her schedule and photos of her batch swipes as if proof could see trust where she had salted the earth. The bank case for the HELOC attempt closed with a notation that the application had been cancelled. The agent recommended fraud alert on our credit, which I put in place and then added a freeze like a stubborn man layering coats. The city marked our water dispute resolved in our favour with an email that had a cheerful clip art faucet at the top that made me laugh in that bleak way you only do when paperwork makes jerks. The PTA hosted the chili cook-off, and I stood behind a folding table while kids spilled crackers and the gym's broken scoreboard blinked random numbers like it was trying to guess my future. I waved people to the cake mom for payments and told everyone the QR code was designed by a dad who had too much time in the evenings. My wife came with our daughter and stood on the opposite side of the room and looked at me the way someone looks at a museum piece they used to own. People said hi to me with an extra softness like they were aiming at bruises. I learned a thing about community. It corners you with kindness until you step back into your body. My wife said she wanted to work on us, and I said I wanted to work on myself and our daughter. I told her I would attend counselling if the sessions included accountability and not just the kind of performative insight people parrot while making the same decisions. She said I was cold, and I said cold is sometimes the only way to keep the circuits from fusing. We agreed to discuss dividing the house equity if things kept moving towards separate lives by spring. Every clause felt like someone cutting a sandwich with a ruler. I hated it and needed it. 4 weeks after the storage unit, the University Research Lab sent another letter, this time an update that the identified dataset had been closed and that participants would receive a summary of results in 6 months. I put it in the November folder because I had started labelling months, thinking I could archive my life like that would guarantee finding it later. The insurance agent dropped off a little calendar with pictures of barns, and our daughter took it for her room and circled dates with a purple pen, holidays and her cousin's recital and the first day of the school book fair. She asked if her mum would be there for the reading circle. I said maybe. She said maybe like it was better than no. Children make allowances for the people who made them. It is how they survive us. We met with a mediator who used the word containment the way my wife uses the word ventilation, and I saw the professional religion in birth. I gave the mediator a copy of my boundaries letter, and he nodded as if I had turned in homework early. My wife said she had stopped going to East Willow and was disentangling the lease addendum, but then I saw the parking garage charge again on our joint account because she had never removed it as a safe payment method. When I pointed it out, she said she had grabbed coffee with a co-worker after a shift the way the sentence "I didn't mean to" stands in for everything people mean and do anyway. I moved the boundaries folder to the front of my desk drawer. I am not proud that I did it with the satisfaction of someone alphabetizing in an emergency. Christmas lights went up early on Hawthorne that year as if people needed a ritual to pin the rest of the days to. Our daughter and I went to a tree lot where the air smelled like cut green and trucks and men trying to act competent with twine. We brought home a tree too big for the corner and I sawed the trunk while she supervised like a foreman. We strung lights and her face spun with the coloured reflections in the glass. My wife texted later to say the tree looked nice. She sent a photo of a coffee mug and a pair of socks on a couch I had never sat on. I stared at the photo too long and then deleted it because I am not a museum and she's not an artifact worth preserving in that way. I think about the first email, the water transfer, more often than I should. It did not cause anything. It only announced what the currents had been doing under the surface for months. Water keeps flowing whether you notice or not. There's a small humming water meter in the basement of every building you walk past, and once you become a person who notices that, you can't stop. Most of the time they hum at a steady rate. Sometimes there is a higher, distressed sound that suggests a leak. I drove to East Willow one more time, in January when the afternoon sun makes even the uglier streets look like they were designed for postcards. I parked beyond the storage facility near the old feedlot fence, where the wind sounds like a person trying to remember a song. I walked to 1144, to the apartment building with the uneven steps and the mailboxes that lean as if the wall is too tired. I did not key in. I do not want to be that man in the stories. I stood on the sidewalk and listened for the sound of the water meter in the small ground level panel next to the entrance. I could hear its faint ticking through the metal plate, not unlike the slow shift of a clock you can't see. Behind me, a child laughed, the way children laugh while their parents rearrange their entire lives. The laughter bounced off the brick and became impossible to locate. I held the legal pad with the case numbers and email printouts inside my coat-like paper could warn me. It does not, but the way helps. I ask myself questions I can't answer honestly without time mocking me. If someone told you two keys on your ring opened two different homes and you had to choose which door to name as yours, would you stand on a sidewalk and wait for me to speak before you decided? Would you demand to see, to count, to list? Or would you walk away and start over with one box and a new label? I am a man who makes folders. I am trying to be a man who makes a life. At home, our daughter learned to make grilled cheese without supervised panic. She wears socks that never match on purpose and tells me it is fashion. We made a chart on the fridge that lists mornings for her mom and mornings for me, and she moves a magnet shaped like a bed across it with the solemnity of a judge. My wife and I send weekly emails that read like business memos with bullet points about schedules and pickups and who will attend the winter concert. Sometimes she signs off with a sentence that reaches toward apology. I reply with sentences that never quite touch it. I keep the October folder where it began, in the second drawer of my desk behind the stapler. Not because I need to reopen it, but because I want to remind myself that paper can hold the outline of a story, but not the story. The water email sits at the top, a thin sheet that tilts her life. I imagine sometimes that in another version of this, the meter on East Willow ticks for someone else and my house has only one key and my wife's hoodie smells like the same cheap lemon forever. But meters do what meters do. They count what flows when you are not looking. On nights when the house creaks and the wind sifts through the cottonwood, I hear a faint tapping against the quiet, like a valve somewhere turning. I picture a metal box on a wall in a building that will never be mine, and a tiny red digital number climbing. I listen to the sound until it becomes something else, until the counting becomes breathing, until I am sure I still can.